Has there been any more meetings with senior officials and Israelis today regarding the ceasefire or the situation on the Israel-Lebanon border?
I have no additional specific meetings to talk about today, except that even today, we are in touch with our counterparts in Qatar, in Israel, and certainly in Egypt about trying to see if we can get a proposal that can be finally culminated and a ceasefire deal can be achieved. So those conversations are active even today.
There was a report that Jake Hochstein and Brett McGurk had a virtual meeting today with Dermer and I think some other Israeli officials. Is that not true?
I won't confirm any specific individual sessions except to tell you that even today there have been ongoing conversations with our counterparts, as you would expect there would be. So even though there's not teams meeting in Doha or Cairo right now, it's not like the effort has lapsed.
And then on Israel, we asked Karine, not me, I wasn't here yesterday, but my colleagues asked Karine in many different ways about the president's recent comments with regard to Netanyahu not doing enough to secure a ceasefire deal. So my question is whether he has directly expressed that himself to Netanyahu, that he is not doing enough.
I would say that the conversations with the Prime Minister every time they occur are very direct and very forthright. These are two guys that know each other well, and the President he makes his concerns very plainly known. But for all the things that those two gents may not agree on politically, and maybe not even completely agree on in the conduct of the war, they do agree on the central tenet that Israel needs to be defended, that the Israeli people shouldn't have to live next door to that kind of a threat, and that the United States and President Biden specifically is going to continue to stand with Israel as they defend themselves against this threat, and to do everything that we can to try to bring this conflict to a close.
And then one quick one, just for clarification, because a lot continues to happen on this front. When the president is calling for a ceasefire, does he mean a permanent ceasefire at this point, or does he mean one long enough to allow the hostages to be released?
Well, it's a little bit of both. I mean, the ceasefire that we're really trying to drive out right now is getting to phase one, which gets you 6 weeks of no fighting. 6 weeks of no fighting, and that means more humanitarian assistance and then getting at least the first tranche of hostages out, the ones that are at the most risk, elderly, sick, women in particular. But if you can get through phase one, because once you get into phase one, and that's the goal, just let us get to phase one right now, then you can start building towards phase two. And if you can get to phase two, you can get both sides to phase two, well, then you're talking about a real potential end to the hostilities in general, which of course will be a general ceasefire. So what we're focused on right now is phase one. That's a 6-week ceasefire.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks, appreciate it. Taking a step back, just to follow up there, has the message from this administration been to families of Americans held hostage still that the only hope for their loved ones is getting to phase one of that ceasefire deal?
Our message to the families, and we conveyed this recently, Mr. Sullivan did, is that we're going to keep doing everything we can to get their loved ones home where they belong. Everything we can. Right now, we continue to believe that the best option, the best possible way to do that is through this deal that's been on the table now for how many months. And as I've said before, I'll say so again today, we still believe these gaps can be narrowed. We still believe it's an achievable outcome. Whether we'll get there or not, I don't know. But we still believe that that we're close enough that we got to keep our shoulders to the wheel.
I guess my question is, it might be the best option, but is it the only option?
I think it would be imprudent for me to either negotiate the details of this deal in public or to speculate about any other kinds of opportunities might occur if it falls apart. I just don't think it would be useful for me to do that. What I can assure you, and we have assured the families, is that President Biden and this entire national security team is 100% dedicated to getting their loved ones home. Right now, the locus of that energy, the full focus of this administration is trying to get this ceasefire deal in place.
Do you have a timeline for when this latest proposal, peace proposal, is going to be made?
Ultimately, we'd like to have it now. There's a real sense of urgency here to try to get this done. And as I said earlier to Amr, I mean, even today, we've been having very active conversations with our counterparts in the region to try to get it across the finish line. We want to get it done now. It needs to be closed.
Does the president feel particular pressure about typically when Americans are detained somewhere overseas, he can sort of act unilaterally with partners and so forth, but can do that? This has been much more complex because of Israel's desire to lead anything. Does he have a separate track for unilateral actions that he could take, and does he have a timeline for that?
Nothing's more important to the president than safety and security of Americans overseas, particularly those that are being held hostage or detained. And of course, the president wants to take the widest view possible of options available to him to secure the release of people that are held hostage or detained. And you've seen that we have not been loath to get creative in trying to figure out ways to do that. Of course, we think through many different options and alternatives. It would be irresponsible if we didn't, Kelly. But, as I said earlier, we still believe, and part of that is because we know we have gotten this done before with a previous hostage swap. We still believe that this is the best way to move forward. But we'll see where it goes, and obviously I'm certainly not in a position, nor would I ever try to close down decision space for the president in terms of options that might be available to him.
Thanks, Graham. Thanks, John. Getting back to the Middle East, the president on February the 26th said, "My hope is by next Monday we will have a ceasefire." On Saturday evening, just past, he said, "We are on the verge of having an agreement." And it was on Monday morning when he was asked whether Prime Minister Netanyahu was doing enough to reach a deal, he replied no. Why did it take him more than 6 months to reach that conclusion?
Conclusion? What conclusion?
That Prime Minister Netanyahu isn't doing enough to get a ceasefire.
The president wants this ceasefire. The president knows that in order to get this ceasefire, it requires leadership. It requires compromise. And it requires a common understanding of exactly how this ceasefire is going to benefit the people of Israel and the people of Gaza. And there are substantial things in here for the people of Gaza. But if you're asking me to apologize or issue some sort of regret because we want to get caught trying, because we want to see it over the finish line, because there are times when we've been optimistic that we can get there, only to learn that we couldn't, I ain't gonna do it. There is nothing wrong with continuing to try to achieve this incredibly difficult negotiation and this outcome, a ceasefire that again would visit terrific benefits all around, including in the region. And so have there been times when we've been stymied? Yes. Have there been times when we thought we were close and turned out that we weren't as close as we thought? Absolutely. And you know what? Today might be one of those days. Even today, I told the gaps are, we can narrow them. And today might be one of those days that maybe I'll prove to be wrong. But no apologies for trying. No apologies for keeping the shoulder to the wheel.
But the issue isn't apologies about trying. The issue is, does the administration have a realistic view of Prime Minister Netanyahu's willingness to make peace?
I think we know Prime Minister Netanyahu pretty well. Nobody better than Joe Biden.
Sincere about
I've
one
answered the
pace.
question.
The Middle East, the Justice Department also unsealed charges against Hamas leaders for the actions of October 7th. The charges were dated back in February, but one of the Hamas leaders that was named is currently located in Doha, and I'm wondering if the U.S. is pressing Qatar to have that leader extradited or arrested.
I don't have any law enforcement activity to speak to about that today.
Is there any impact that you think unsealing these charges from February will have on the negotiations where they stand right now? Why unseal them today?
Well, again, I refer you to the Justice Department for the decision to why unseal them, as you rightly said, that the indictments actually date way back. So that I let the Justice Department speak to the decision about unsealing it. As for an effect on the discussions, it was important to unseal those. It was important to make that known that we were holding these Hamas leaders accountable. At the same time, we continue, as I said to Amr, having active discussions about the ceasefire deal. We still believe we can get there.
What about Al Jazeera in the back? Go ahead,
Thank you so much.
I really appreciate it. I was very quickly, John.
Sorry, man.
I appreciate it. What pressure is the United States putting on Hamas and Netanyahu to close this deal?
I'm sorry, say again, what pressure we're putting on?
What pressure is the United States putting on Hamas and Netanyahu to close this deal?
It's not just about twisting arms and putting pressure. It is about having active, what we hope to be constructive conversations about negotiating the final details. And that's really where we are. And in any negotiation, when you get down to the brass tacks, that's when the horse trading really begins, and that's where it gets difficult, and that's where we are right now. It's really about trying to get both sides to yes here. And again, I can't negotiate the details in public with you. But, I heard a question asked yesterday in here about, why we're only pressuring one side and not the other. And I tell you what, it was a question about, how only the prime minister is feeling the heat. And I'll tell you, if you're Mr. Sinwar, he's buried in a tunnel somewhere. He ain't coming up for air too much. His forces have been decimated. His resources have dried up. The people he claimed to be protecting and defending are living in deplorable conditions because of the war that he started on the 7th of October. So I don't buy this notion that there's no pressure being put on Hamas or Hamas leadership. And the indictments that were unsealed yesterday, I think, prove that as well. So.